All right, so Chapter 2, Section 6 deals with ratios and proportions, and specifically writing and solving them. So, first of all, a ratio uses division to compare two quantities. And there's a few different ways that a ratio can be written. If we wanted to write the ratio of two quantities, A and B, we could write it in any of these three ways. Okay, A over B kind of as a fraction, A to B, writing it using words, or A colon B. All of these mean the same thing. It's the ratio of A to the quantity B. So let's look at an example in which we're going to practice how to write ratios given some information. So here we're given a scenario that a volleyball team plays 14 home matches and 10 away matches. So we could write some various ratios related to this information. So first we're going to write a ratio of home matches to away matches. So home matches to away matches. In other words, it's going to be our home matches to our away matches. And so that, given this information, we have 14 home matches to 10 away matches. And we can simplify this just as we would any fraction. This does simplify to 7 over 5. So 7 home matches to every 5 away matches. Here's another ratio that we can write given this information. Okay, we can write a ratio of home matches to all matches. So home to all. Our home matches to all matches. Well, again, we have 14 home matches. All the matches would be the 14 matches plus the 14 home matches plus the 10 away matches. So that would be 14 home to 24 all, or 24 total. And once again, we can simplify this ratio to being 7 to 12. 7 home matches to every 12 matches altogether. So something else we're going to talk about in this section is proportions. And a proportion is basically just an equation that states that two ratios are equivalent. And again, as we've been writing these ratios, they're fractions, typically. So it's basically an equation that shows two fractions are equal to one another. In general, it typically looks something like this, where you have A to B being set equal to C to D. Okay. And the main thing we're going to focus on is solving proportion. So it is an equation. We're going to use our equation solving skills to solve various proportions. So for example, in the second example, we're going to solve a proportion. We're actually going to solve two. So here we have the proportion 11/6 is equal to x over 30. Okay, one ratio being set equal to another is a proportion. And so we can solve this for x. X is being divided by 30, so we can take this equation, and in order to get x by itself, we'll use the inverse operation of multiplication. Multiply both sides by 30. These will cancel out, leaving x by itself, which is what we wanted. And here we can do some simplifying. 30 over 6 is 5, and 5 times 11 is 55. Or if you want to just work that out as 30 times 11 over 6 and get 330 divided by 6 and get 55, you can do it that way as well. And so in this case, x would be 55. Let's take a look at another example. This one's a little different because instead of having just a single variable on the top, this is m plus 3. But we do it the same way we've been doing. What's being done to m? It's being added to 3, or 3 is being added to it. and then it's being divided by 8. So to undo that, we use our inverse operations. We work backwards. So here, M3 is being added, then it's being divided by 8. So first we do the opposite of division by 8. We multiply both sides by 8. These cancel, leaving you with M plus 3 is equal here. I can do some simplifying. 8 cancels with 64 to give you 8, and 40 over 8 is 5. Then finally, take both sides of the equation and subtract 3, and you'll get the M is 2. All right, so another thing we're going to talk about is setting up a proportion. Sometimes there's problems in which there's an unknown quantity, and we can set up a proportion to help us figure that unknown quantity out. So for example, let's say we have a recipe for salsa that calls for 30 tomatoes for every 12 pints of salsa. But we want to know how many tomatoes are needed to make 4 pints of salsa. So we can set up a proportion to figure out the unknown quantity in this case. If we let X represent the number of tomatoes needed for 4 pints of salsa, there's a few different ways we can look at this problem. So in this problem, there's several things being compared. There's the small recipe to the normal size recipe, and then there's also the pints of tomatoes that are needed in relation, or the pints of salsa that can be made in relation to the number of tomatoes needed. So this is one way we can kind of look at this problem. Okay, the small recipe in relation to the normal recipe, we can see the difference in tomatoes and the difference in the pints. So we can set up a proportion. X over 30 is 4 equal to 4 over 12. So notice how the numerators both deal with the small recipe, and the denominators both deal with the larger recipe. Okay, so one way we can compare the quantities in this problem involve the small recipe in relation to the larger recipe, or the normal recipe. Okay, and if we solve this proportion, to solve for X, we would multiply by 30 on both sides, and we would find that X is 10. Okay, you would actually need 10 tomatoes to make 4 pints of salsa, whereas here we need 30 tomatoes to make 12 pints. Another way you might look at this information is, instead of comparing the small recipe to the normal, you can look at how your tomatoes and your pints compare to one another in the small recipe and the normal recipe. And so we could set up this proportion. Notice how our numerators both deal with the number of tomatoes needed in the small recipe and then the large. And then the denominators both deal with the number of pints needed. Okay, 4 for the small, 12 for the large. And in the same way that we could solve this one, in this case X is being divided by 4. So if we multiply both sides by 4, you are going to get that X is equal to 10. Okay, so it requires 10 tomatoes to make 4 pints of salsa, but these are two different proportions that can be set up to solve the same problem. You're just kind of comparing different things in different ways.